believe that my education was predominantly based upon behaviourist and traditionalist teaching philosophies. The behaviourist teaching philosophies that I experienced in the classroom reflected society's, largely Western civilization's emphasis on intrinsic factors being the primary basis for societal motivation, think work bonuses and pay rises. This is coupled with the emergence of capitalism following the industrialization period. Capitalism and the values it entails became increasingly embedded within the social-cultural environment following the First and Second World Wars. As a repercussion, those raised within this social-cultural context became manifestations of what capitalism valued, offering intrinsic goods while neglecting the intrinsic. Combating this view, Montessori education utilizes intrinsic motivation, modeling activities with the internal interests of the child being the primary basis. 19th to 20th century theorists such as John B. Watson, the forefather of the psychological school of behaviorism, studied the correlative effect between environmental influences and human behavior. His experiments were controversial even for its time. However, they did prove that humans could be conditioned to behave in a particular way. A contemporary to Watson, Edward Thorndike, devised a theory known as operant conditioning. He put forth a law of effect which stated that any behavior followed by pleasant circumstances is likely to be repeated. B.F. Skinner furthered this theory by coining a new term into the law of effect: reinforcement. Reinforcement regarded the ability for positive and negative reinforcements to alter behavior. Positive reinforcement strengthened the behavior, while negative reinforcement weakened the behavior. This is reflected in the classrooms that I partook in, as I received positive reinforcement for good grades, such as promises for excursions or end-of-term pizza parties, and negative reinforcement, detention and writing lines, for bad behavior such as incomplete homework and neglecting the school's value system. These reinforcements were neither intrinsic, however, and this is what differentiates it from Montessori educators. In regards to how I was taught, the authorities in the classroom in which I learnt in were clear, and this heavily reflects traditionalist roots. In addition, there was an emphasis on the product, grading, and a value on content, facts, and objectivity. It was an intrinsic and competition-based value system and motivators that measured students against a nationally accepted standard. These are all identified as characteristics of traditional education. Particularly during my formative years, there was very little interaction between my classmates, and multiple intelligences weren't held in a high regard, nor practiced in the classroom to cater for students. Competition was encouraged to an extent, and this effectively isolated us from our peers. The manner and style in which the teacher taught was how the students were supposed to learn. Schooling wasn't so much a learning facilitator as it was a system, and like all systems, its inherent function was to churn out a particular product confiding to a universal standard. Moreover, I wasn't taught how to learn. I was taught what I needed to learn, and how to do certain tasks in order to meet a standard. Excelling at school wasn't necessarily about being intelligent and creative, as it was about learning how the system worked and how to use that knowledge as an advantage over others. In the context of axiology, this puts a value on how well a student can function as a cog within a system. On the contrary, Montessori educators emphasize the learning process while placing a value on feelings, creativity, and subjectivity. It is an intrinsic motivator and cooperation-based system that reflects the views of early progressive education theorist John Dewey, who emphasized pragmatism and naturalism in the classroom, a staple of Montessori education. His view of knowledge was that it arose from a person's adaptation of their own social cultural contexts and an inquiry progress that wasn't a passive interaction with reality, but rather the belief that true inquiry stemmed from manipulation of the environment to test a thesis. Opposed to a traditionalist view, they don't need to match their inquiry to accepted reality. As akin to progressive educators, Montessori holds the view that reality is subjective and malleable, casting students in light of innovators of reality. In the context of epistemology, this would mean the truth lies within the student, opposed to the view of the truth being defined by current reality and truth held by authority. And in the context of axiology, this means the student is valued as an individual. With this viewpoint in mind, it is seen that progressive education isn't a system that produces a product. Rather, it is a facilitator abiding to humanist and naturalist principles that view students as catalysts that keep society turning and continually innovating. This is why, in the context of Montessori classrooms, the student learns through self-discovery. The traditional education, on the other hand, largely inhibits innovation, as the system in itself neglects to recognize that society is constantly changing with time, in parallel to social and technological advancements. In summary, Montessori is vastly different in comparison to the education system I was subjected to in both the context of epistemology and axiology, and the way these were applied to the learning context. Taking a Christian perspective on the matter, Montessori does not seem to confine to the Christian values, which states that there is absolute truth and that salvation is through Christ alone. John 14 verse 6 states that Jesus answered, "I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me." Montessori demonstrates the antithesis of this and takes a humanist view of humans finding salvation with themselves and effectively taking on the role of God. Contrary to Montessori, my school held true to this view of absolute truth and salvation being only through Christ.